Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on onshore CO2 storage development in Europe. It's really our pleasure to welcome you all at this very important session where we'll learn about onshore storage developments in Denmark. My name is Elina Levin. I'm the head of public affairs at the Global CCS Institute. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Institute, we're an international think tank with the mission to accelerate deployment of carbon capture and storage, a vital technology needed to tackle climate change and achieve climate neutrality. We have offices around the world. Our headquarters are in Melbourne, Australia, but we have offices in London, Brussels, Washington, D.C., in the Middle East, and in Japan, China, and Asia. And we have more than 200 members that spread across governments, private sector, technology providers, emitters, think tanks, research organizations. So it's our pleasure to host this webinar today. Before we start, I would like to give you a couple of housekeeping items. So this webinar is recorded. It's 1 hour long, and the recording will be available on the Institute's website in a few weeks. We'll also try to make the presentations available on our website also in a few weeks' time. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section on the bottom of the Zoom window. And if we have time at the end of the webinar, we'll allow a little bit of time for Q&A from the audience. So, well, as all of you know, offshore storage has been integral to CCS deployment in Europe for many years now and for years to come. However, there have been discussions about the necessity of developing onshore storage in Europe to help scale up deployment of CCS and allow access to CCS for inland emitters and also including smaller emitters, but also hopefully to reduce the cost of CCS by reducing the cost of the CO2 transport component that will transport CO2 to the onshore storage. So in 2024, this year, Denmark became the first mover in this space and issued 3 exploration licenses to explore onshore storage in the country. So today we'll have speakers from the Danish government, from the Ministry of Environment, from the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities, from the Danish Energy Agency. Also, we have 2 project operators with us, and a Danish think tank, Concito. So on this slide, you see the names of our speakers. So I'll say them again. So we'll have Frida Lassen from the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. We have Jesper Brandrup from Danish Energy Agency. Kjetil, sorry if I'm pronouncing it not correctly, Green Store CO2 project. And Ulrik Olbern from the Kalundborg CO2 Hub project. Those are 2 projects that received licenses for the exploration on onshore storage, and Tobias Sorensen from Concito think tank in Denmark. So I'll first open the floor to Frida for the introductory remarks from the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. Frida, thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elina, and thank you to the Global CCS Institute for organizing this interesting webinar. My name is Frida Lassen. I'm a special advisor at the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities, working at our CCS division. And I will just give you a very brief introduction to sort of the background for CCS and a little bit about climate policy in Denmark. I think it makes sense to go back to 2019 and start the story there. We had a national election in Denmark where climate was a very important topic. It was actually the most important topic if you asked voters who to vote for, which party or which candidate to vote for. And 6 months later, the government landed a political agreement on a climate act, the first climate act in Denmark, which has a legal obligation of a 70% reduction target in 2030 compared to 1990. So this was a very ambitious target, and in 2020 it was decided to make CCS legal and roll out CCS in Denmark as part of the strategy to reach this 70% target. And since then, CCS has actually had a broad political support in the Danish parliament. It has made it possible to make a number of political agreements on CCS during the past years. I want to mention that it's part of the Danish strategy that CCS cannot and should not stand alone. We must carry on using energy efficiently and continue expansion of renewable energy and green solutions. But in selected sectors, it's currently not possible or too expensive to reduce all emissions. And this is where CCS is an important tool. CCS can also contribute with negative emissions, and currently the Danish government has set a target of a 110% reduction in 2050 compared to 1990. So we will need negative emissions also to achieve that. With the Danish policies, we expect CCS to contribute with 2.9 million tons of CO2 being captured and stored by 2030 as part of this, the Danish climate target. And I think I also just want to mention that it's part of the Danish CCS policy that CCS should be rolled out on market terms and that it should focus on the entire value chain. If we move to the storage part, which is why we are here today, the Danish subsoil is very well suited for storing CO2. And as part of the Danish roadmap in CCS roadmap in 2021, it was decided politically to work for Denmark to become a European hub for CO2 storage. So this is a big part of the Danish strategy to also import CO2. But the Danish Energy Agency is really the authority under the Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities for administrating these tenders that we have for exploration for storage of CO2 in the Danish subsoil. And they also play a big role in hearings and dialogue with citizens and industry and municipalities. And that's why we also have Jesper here today to tell you a lot more about that in detail. So I will actually leave it at that and let you move on.
Thank you very much, Frida, and thank you for providing that overall context. It's very important to hear that CCS is part of a bigger climate agenda and also even bigger political debate or political discussion in Denmark. So it's very important to have that context, that CCS doesn't stay alone. It is integrated in the overall climate agenda and along with other measures that are important for Denmark. So thank you for those remarks. And now, as you mentioned, we'll move on to Jesper to hear from the Danish Energy Agency. And Jesper, I'm sure everybody is quite interested to hear the rationale in Denmark for the developing onshore storage and the framework that the Danish Energy Agency had to put in place for the licensing process. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll see if we can get around those rather large subjects. So I'm Jesper Engel Brandrup, and I'm the team lead for the storage team of the DEA's CCS office. So essentially, we're a team of mostly geologists. I'm a lawyer myself, and we work with the administration of licenses and tendering licenses for exploration and storage of CO2. So what I would like to present today is well, first of all, I would touch upon the political agreements that Frida mentioned, and couple that with the subsoil regulation we have in place. I will go a bit further into the rationale for onshore storage and how that fits into our strategy, and also in terms of emitters and infrastructure. And then finally, I will have a few points on public acceptance and a status on how on the Danish licensing rounds for CO2 storage licenses and the different projects that are already underway. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So Frida mentioned the political agreement in 2020, and I think this slide shows how there is actually a really great political support for CCS in Denmark. We don't only have that agreement; we have several large political agreements that I would see as the most important overall framework for what we do with CCS. All the agreements in their entirety are on the ministry webpage if you'd like to read further into them. I've highlighted two of the agreements that we will look a bit more at today, which are the agreements, actually two agreements on the CCS roadmap from June and December 2021, because that's where it was agreed that Denmark should be a European hub for CCS. And I would also like to look a bit more on the agreement on strengthened framework conditions from 2023, because that's where it was agreed to do onshore storage formally. That's where it was agreed that an onshore licensing round should be made. So to couple this with our regulation, I've had questions before from authorities from other countries on how has Denmark moved so fast with getting regulation in place. And the answer is generally that we already had it. We have had since the basically since the 50s and since the 80s a regulation on hydrocarbon production, and we have had regulation on how to use the subsoil in general. So that's geothermal energy, other use of the subsoil as well. And what we've done with CO2 storage is we've basically made minor adaptations to that. And then in 2016, we had you could call it a brush up of the rules. We made the CCS executive order to ensure that the directive was properly implemented. But I would say that substantially the regulatory framework for storing CO2 was mostly already there with the rules from hydrocarbons, all the model licenses, the model joint operating agreements, and so on and so forth. Those are adapted versions of hydrocarbon documents. So most of the framework was already in place. We haven't done much with that since 2020. We've had the questions on how do we make pilot projects, which was a new thing. There was the discussion on state participation. How should we do that? But in the larger regulatory picture, most of it was already in place. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So here we're moving a bit more into the rationale for onshore storage of CO2. So the annual long-term CO2 capture potential from Danish point sources is estimated to be between 5.5 and 11 million tons of CO2. And the major emitters in Denmark are waste incineration, industry and combined heat and power plants. And what they have in common is that they are mostly centered around major cities, all of which have port facilities. So I think that speaks quite well into the idea of being a European hub. In terms of transport, essentially there are three major ways of transportation: ship, truck, or pipe. And what has garnered the most attention in the recent year or two has definitely been pipeline transportation. This summer we enacted a new act on pipeline transportation of CO2. I would say the general main takeaway from that legislation is that it's also old regulation. It's very much similar to the regulation we already had on hydrocarbon pipelines, but it ensured that the rules were clear for CO2 storage. How and where it should be placed, we generally leave that to the market. We will have this autumn some new rules in place on the economic regulation on access to transport. It's mainly an ex-ante system where the Danish utility regulator, it will have supervision of tariffs, but if you want a tariff changed or renegotiated, that's done through complaints. So essentially, it's mostly market-based, but with a regulatory backdrop, you could call it. So if you would move to the next slide. So I've included this figure, which is from a report from 2021, I believe it's from. It's from Rambøll, and they did some model calculations on essentially the business case of various scenarios of CO2 storage in Denmark. So it looks like 5 cases. It's essentially 3 cases: 1, 2A, 2B, 2C, and 3. And I've put it in here in the slide just to show that the what they call the medium scale domestically focused and the large scale international are much more valuable, both in terms of net present value and internal rate of return, than the 3 other models. Yeah. So next slide, please. So the way we develop the CCS value chain in Denmark is it's a two-pronged approach. We have the capture part where we have these subsidy pools, the CCUS pool, that are given out through tenders. It's a subsidy of the entire value chain. It could potentially be given to a winning bidder. Could be found in any part of the value chain. When we had the last round, it was mostly emitters that were involved in the final rounds of that scheme. And as I understand it, the next round is expected to go live any time now. It's almost done and ready to open. And the other prong is the storage part, where we give out licenses. As I mentioned, it's giving the licenses is a very similar process to what we've done with hydrocarbons and geothermal energy. We don't subsidize the licenses. I would also add that on the other hand, we haven't put any hard financial terms on it. With hydrocarbons, you have a specific tax scheme for that for that essentially just puts an extra tax on hydrocarbon production. We haven't done that. We haven't introduced royalties or other economic benefits to the direct economic benefits to the state in this. But we do have the state involvement through Nordsøfonden, where they participate with a 20% share of the licenses. So that's they participate equally in expenses and income. Next slide, please. So moving to the public acceptance and onshore part of the presentation, generally public acceptance is quite high. I've added a figure from a very recent study from it's a collaboration between the University of Copenhagen and University of Barcelona, where respondents were asked in a hypothetical scenario if they would be willing to pay for the implementation of BECCS. And it shows quite a large number of it shows quite a large acceptance and the compared to the price per ton of CO2 stored. So generally, when we speak of public acceptance in terms of licenses, when we talk about a general strategy of public acceptance, our main focus has always been to turn it into a dialogue with the concerned citizens. We try to basically do the opposite of convince. We don't go out to the public with the aim of convincing them. We don't see them as underinformed or unenlightened. The idea is that these are legitimate concerns, and we want to have a dialogue with the citizens, the concerned citizens around it. And what we do is we provide the facts, and through that we try to eradicate the myths and prejudices around CCS. We have put some of the responsibility of the citizen dialogue with the license holders. There are specific clauses in the licenses that there must be continuous engagement. There are also a clause that whenever something is to be established or built or whatever, the concerned citizens have to be involved. So yeah, basically our role is we try to harmonize the communication between the license holders to the citizens, and we try to provide guidelines. But ultimately, we've put the responsibility with them. So next slide, please. So as you can see from this figure made by GEOS, the Danish Geological Survey, there is a pretty big potential for storage in Denmark, 12 to 22 billion tons of CO2. If everything works, that it should be taken with a grain of salt, since not everything will be possible to utilize. What you can see on this map is where the emitters are located, and you can also see where both there are possible structures and where there are structures that have been selected for maturing. Those are the dark green ones, where the Geological Survey has made some investigations as to whether the subsoil is useful. And I think we can go to the next slide, please. So that leads us to where we are today. We gave 3 offshore exploration licenses in 2023. Those are in the left part of the image, where you can see the 2 TotalEnergies licenses and the license shared between Wintershall and Ineos. The top one between Wintershall and Ineos is also the one where we are currently looking at an application for a storage permit. So we have that as a very high priority to try to enable that project while ensuring that it takes place in a safe manner. We recently gave out 3 onshore exploration licenses: the Gasum, the Rødby, and the Havnsø licenses, which are they are also really starting the work on investigating the subsoil in their areas. Any time now as well, I will be later this autumn, we will also open a new tender for Torning, which was not awarded in the last round. And then after that, we will have a nearshore license round for the Ines, Lisa, and Jammerbugt area, the nearshore areas that you can also see on the map. I cannot provide a definite date or time frame for when we will do that, but the ambition is to do it as soon as possible. And with that, I think that's it for me. I hope that that provided some knowledge to the interested parties.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesper. Yeah, definitely a lot of knowledge, a lot of information and insight that could be useful for other governments and other stakeholders in the CCS business. And now I would like to turn to the project operators. I'm sure it's a very exciting endeavor for you, but also a lot of huge responsibility. So I'm sure our audience wants to hear about your experience as an applicant for the licenses, also how the projects are progressing. And I think we probably have a lot of questions in the audience about the stakeholder engagement. I think Jesper already mentioned about public participation or the community engagement from the government point of view, but I think there is a lot of curiosity how project operators are engaging with stakeholders and what you're hearing from communities. So we'll start with Kjetil from the Harbor Energy. They were awarded a license for onshore storage, exploration and green store. So Kjetil, floor is yours.
Thank you. And I have a presentation, I believe, as well. And now you are, at least very soon, looking at the green store license, the green store area. This is where we are going to store the CCS. Just a few quick words on the harbor first. We are an international oil and gas company. 2 weeks ago, Wintershall was incorporated in harbor. So now we are 5,000 people worldwide. Next slide, please. And the combined company is pretty large on CCS. We are probably the operator with the most diversified portfolio. Operating the Viking project in the UK, which is one of the world's largest offshore CCS projects. Several more licenses in the UK. The Luna and the Havsend licenses offshore in Norway, and then Greensand offshore Denmark, and then finally Green Store onshore Denmark, which is kind of new ground for us. But you can go to the next slide, please, because it's worth having a look at why are we doing this. Because we know that we need to reduce the emissions. And we also know now, as you can see in the picture, where the large emissions are. It's not in Nordic countries. It is in Central and Northern Europe, which is not that far away from where we have our storage sites. And onshore storage is in many ways kind of a game changer, at least due to the cost, which I will come back to in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So in June, we got our first exploration license for onshore CCS in Denmark, a green store in Jutland, where we expect to store 250 million tons of CO2 in 2 geological formations, which is 5 times the Danish annual emissions. So it's quite a lot of CO2 we can store. But before we come to the storage part, we have to explore properly. And I can turn to the next slide, because there is a huge difference between storing onshore and not to say offshore. Offshore, we need huge equipment, large rigs, harsh weather, a lot of infrastructure to even make it happen, which means that the cost per ton stored CO2 is quite high. And to make this into a new business, so we need to get the cost down. And this is where onshore comes in. Next slide, please. But the process itself is very much easier. Do a well, and as an example, an offshore well can be priced to say 50, 60, 70 million euros. An onshore well, 3-4 million euros, which says that only on that part you have kind of saved a lot of money, which make it also cheaper for the emitters. We still believe that offshore is a way to go, but we need to get the volumes in place to do that as well. Next slide, please. Another thing we're facing onshore is people. Offshore, we don't have that, I don't want to say issue, but that's we are far away from everyone. No one sees us, so it's kind of easy to get going with tend to say no problems at all. But onshore, it's about the NUMBY, not NIMBY, but NUMBY, not under my backyard. People are concerned. CCS is CO2 storage is a new thing. They don't know what it entails. So to engage in an open, transparent, and accessible way throughout the project is extremely important. Now, for the last 4 or 5 years, with Aldea from Harperside, we have been extremely active in Germany, advocating for CCS. And one of the things we have done there is to have a cooperation with the University of Bergen, who has built a real It's a small CO2 reservoir. So this, you see the frame on the picture with the blue stuff is the reservoir and the yellow stuff is CO2. So through this project, we've been traveling around Europe and showing how CO2 behaves underground to showcase that it's safe. As long as you have the seal in place, it is completely safe. And over the years, the CO2 will, and at least in aquifers, will go downwards in the reservoir, and at the end become the solid rock. And it's also about showing what is this, because we have had questions: what will happen with? Well, can I get CO2 in my basement? So just understanding that this is something happening 2-3 in our green store 2,000-3,000 meters below the surface. It's also these simple things that we need to understand, but also to understand the process, next steps. Because on Green Store we have a work program, and now we are, say, in the exploration phase. And the first thing people will see is the 3D seismic. They'll see the trucks coming out, and with 3D seismic, you need to have kind of a lot of lines, which means that the trucks will be everywhere, which also means that public engagement in advance is extremely important. People need to understand, and we need to have a dialogue on what we're doing. Then we have the wells coming in 26. The footprint of wells, onshore well, is not that big, talking about 100 times 200 meters. There might be some extra traffic, but still it's something that we need an engagement of. And that's why continuous dialogue information activities locally is kind of the top line in our exploration work program. And then in late 26, we will assess the feasibility. Is it possible for us to store CO2 here? If the answer is yes, then we can be ready for storing CO2 in 2029, which is not that far away. Next slide, please. But we are, as a storage operator, we are not alone. Building CCS, so we're into building an entire new industry, where new parties that haven't talked together has to talk together. We have to talk to the emitters, and emitter has to talk to the transporters. You're coming from businesses with different margins, different language. So just to build this industry, it's not straightforward. And then there's the timing, so we can have the storage side ready. But if we don't have the available CO2, then we have a storage site with no use. We need the infrastructure in place, either pipelines or trucks or trains or whatever, but that needs to be in place to get the CO2 to the storage sites. And all this have to come in the right time. So to make 2029 happen, quite a lot of elements need to fit together. We have been working on this for a while now and have know there is enough CO2. There's enough CO2 out there for all the storage providers. And luckily also with the Net Zero Industry Act coming in, and you see kind of a movement in Europe, we are firm believers that this will happen and are working towards that goal. And then I think I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Kjetil, for sharing this information and insight. I'm sure there's a lot of interest to what you said. Remarkable figures on the cost savings. That could be probably a game changer for the cost of CCS in Europe if we do develop onshore storage. Yeah, thank you very much. And would like to hear from Ulrik about the Equinor's experience with your license that you received at the same time for for the project Kalundborg CO2 hub. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Alina, and thank you to Global CCS Institute for hosting this event and for the invitation to participate. Thank you to Frida and Jesper for a good walkthrough of the Danish road to where we are today and the strategies going forward. I think it's, as Norwegians, we tend to believe that it has been some inspiration from Northern Lights, which I think is good. That was the intention behind Northern Lights, to show that CCS at scale, crossing borders, is possible. So I think that competition is, in a way, very good and exactly what we need. Today we can actually celebrate a bit because it's 90 days since the licenses were awarded. So we have finalized the joint operating agreement among the partners. So we submitted that to DEA earlier today. So even though the template was in place, Jesper, there has been up until the very last moment discussion on it, and I think not only from our license but also from the others. So again, we are super happy for being awarded the exploration license. I think that's important. We know that there is some resistance. So what we are doing now for the next 4 years is actually to conduct the work program to assess and verify that the reservoir in the municipality of Kalundborg and around is suitable for storage of CO2, and that is a journey that we need to make sure that all the public is well aware of, and finally, if we deem it to be feasible, it's up to Danish authorities to give a storage license for potential injection later. Then also on our side with the ambition to have injection in place by 2030. As Frida alluded to, the 3 million tons or thereabouts are important to meet the Danish ambitions. So we're super happy to have a strong partnership. Equinor, 2 words about Equinor, obviously, hopefully known to most of you, but a major oil and gas company for 5 decades. We have almost 3 decades of experience when it comes to CCS. So we started at Sleipner in 1996, storing almost 1 million tons of CO2 per year. We moved on to injecting CO2 and still are injecting CO2 from our LNG plant up in north part of Norway. And next week we will have the official opening of our Northern Lights facility with our partners Total Energies and Ineos. So we're happy for the opportunity to explore in Denmark and together with our partners. So Ørsted, former Dong, Danish and global champion, but also a strong partner in the Kalundborg area, being also one of the first customers to Northern Lights. So they're building a terminal today for exports. They are capturing CO2 at 2 power plants. So we think that's a very good fit. And then, as alluded to, Nordsjøfonden is also part of the joint venture. Similarly to Greenstore, we have committed to a work program. It's quite extensive, I would say. It is a lot of activity that needs to happen. So we're working warp speed to get going. So it starts with the seismic acquisition planned to start next year. So we are in the permitting period now. That is also a bit uncharted territory, I think, for DEA. So we are in good dialogue with DEA how to progress on the permit. And prior to permits, we have the stakeholder engagement. So the first thing that we want the public of this area to see is us talking about what will happen and what will not happen. And what's for sure, there will not be CO2 injection the next 4 years. Some people are afraid of that, but it's not. So the first thing that people will see is actually seismic activity. We have some 2,300 landowners where we will need their consent to utilize their land to conduct the seismic activities. And the whole reasoning behind the acquisition of 3D is to establish a good 3D model of the underground. And then we have committed to 2 wells to further explore and also do tests, formation tests in terms of injectivity. And similarly to Green Store, we then have sort of the apply for permanent CO2 storage license or return the area. And again, with the hope then or the ambition to start injection prior to 2030. So the reservoir is depicted here in the red area. We think the reservoir has great potential, but we are careful of promising too much injectivity. So that's what we want to confirm now over the next couple of years, exactly how much in total and per year. And again, provided that we get the permit to inject, and we also need to have the full value chain in place, as Jesper alluded to, with customers. But the full value chain in Denmark is a terminal in Kalundborg, able then to take CO2 by ships, pipeline from the terminal towards the reservoir. But also with the potential to cater for trucks, maybe rail. And there is also talks about the pipeline from the Copenhagen area, tying the big emitters into the region of Kalundborg and being allowed to utilize this storage, again, provided permitting and feasibility of this. So we think that this is a good solution for CO2 captured in Denmark, but also as alluded to by Jesper, potentially given that injectivity is sufficiently high, it can also act as an import hub for volumes from outside Denmark, further pushing down unit costs. And that's what we all need. We need CCS to become acceptable or accepted by the public. So NUMBI, I like the Kjetil, but we need to make sure that they want it or at least accept it to be stored, and that we also can meet the expectations of the customers in terms of timing and affordability. Last thing, maybe, I think the CCS Puljen that has been announced prior to the summer is a good way forward. Most emitters, or all emitters probably, need some sort of funding to start capturing CO2. A challenge that we see is that the timeline of that process would imply that the storage operator would need to give firm commitments prior to FID, and that is of course a challenge, but hopefully through a good dialogue, Jesper and Frida, we can look at ways on still contribute in a good manner. It certainly shows the eagerness from Danish authorities to get started, and I think that is what we need on top of operators like ourselves and Green Store to firm up the technical basis for later permitting. So that's a very short status of where we are today.
Yep.
And
Thank
just
you very much.
consultation. So we will have the first meetings with the public in Kalundborg in a couple of weeks' time.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ulrik and Kjetil, for all this information and for agreeing to be here with us. I see a lot of questions coming up, I'm sure there are questions about safety, and we always have those questions about CCS. How can we assure that CCS is, or that CO2 is secured for a long time to come, and the safety of the environment and people? Maybe can you address, because you're all geologists, you're all working on storage, could you address, and maybe Jesper as well, this question, because I'm sure it's somewhere in the list of questions that we're receiving.
Maybe I should start since I had the word at the end. I'm not a geologist. I'm a core economic guy from Germany. But it's a good question. And the good thing about oil and gas operators is that we are used to dealing with safety. So we're dealing with hydrocarbons. They can explode. CO2 cannot explode. But that does not imply that CO2 does not have some perils, especially when you transport it at the dense phase, where it's cold and under pressure. You need to be aware of the characteristics of CO2 and design all the facilities in such a manner that nothing will happen. And if, for the case that something should happen, that the risk is minimized, so there's no harm to people, livestock, and nature. When it comes to the geological storage, that's what we will spend the next 4 years to really confirm that the models that we have are applicable also here for solid cap rock that makes sure that the CO2 stays where it is. That the model that Kjetil shows is sort of a quick version of how it can work. We need to make sure that it will work here in this region, and it's in our interest, because if it proves later not to be according to our expectations, injectivity will stop, and the business case will become extremely sour. So it's in our at the front of our head. And normally my presentations I start with a safety moment. Due to time, I did not today, but it's super important for us, and we need to be convincing also for the public. It doesn't help if the geologists believe in it. Also, normal people without the geologic background need to buy in that this is safe, and the last word will be made by Danish authorities, which at least gives some comfort that it's not only me and Kjetil that will decide if this is safe. I don't know if you want to add something, Kjetil.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
No, I'll just echo what you were saying. Just echo what you were saying. We are in one way lucky coming from industries where safety is everything. But so people need to trust it, and we need to show that how they can trust it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And also, by the way, it's great to see that great collaboration, cross-fertilization between Norway and Denmark going on. That's great to see. Well, let's move now to Tobias from Concito as a think tank in Denmark. It's a pleasure to give the floor to a fellow think tank organization. So, Tobias, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting this event and inviting me and Concito. So, following up on a very interesting presentation, I will maybe take a step back to look at the case for onshore storage in Denmark and Europe. This is me. My name is Tobias. In case you can't see me, this is from Northern Lights, a field study to visit an almost functioning storage facility. Yeah, this is offshore, and now we're going onshore, and we'll get back to why that is important. But Concito, we work with all things climate, a lot of mitigation in all sectors, and my task is mainly focusing on CCS and CCU, and how that could play a role in the climate policy. And next slide. So I have 4 highlights. So if you can just read them and then zoom out, and I will go into detail. but first we need a lot of CO2 storage very fast. A lot of the potential is onshore. Onshore is cheaper than offshore, surprise. You already heard that. But it also takes time, also onshore, not only what we're doing offshore. And then next slide. So looking into the EU Commission's proposal for an ambitious 2040 reduction target and further towards 2050 in the EU industrial carbon management strategy, we see there's a lot of expectation for CO2 storage from almost 50 million tons in 30 to almost 240 and 250 in 2050. That is possible. I'm not a geologist, but I hear that's what they're saying. But we certainly need to hurry up. But maybe we need to do more. If you click on the next one, we just did a back of an envelope calculation of how much energy in terms of electricity we need to convert CO2 into e-fuels, and just taking these numbers from the left and synthesizing them to fuels for aviation or shipping would require enormous amount of green electricity that we may have in the future, we might not, and it might compromise transition in other sectors, depending on how fast we can scale up renewable energy, and depending on what the cost of these fuels will actually be and how competitive they will be. So if you click on the next, just that's something we're looking into at the moment. It may be more effective to plan for more CO2 storage. That would be a high-level conclusion, but we need a lot of CO2 storage, but we may actually need more than what's in the Commission's current proposal, according to our analysis. Next. That's it. We don't have enough storage sites available at the moment, except almost one ready at Northern Lights. This is a map of Denmark. Probably doesn't make sense for you if you haven't seen Denmark from above before, but what this map is showing is that according to the Danish National Geological Survey, a lot of the theoretical potential for CO2 storage is onshore or near shore. A lot in the depleted oil and gas fields, but also a lot onshore and near shore. Looking at studies, high-level studies of the theoretical potential in Europe, it's the same picture that I get out of them. In EU, if you take Norway, the picture is different because there's a lot of offshore potential, and looking to UK as well. But EU numbers points towards we need onshore storage across Europe. So that's also why we think it is very important that Denmark does a good job and the developers doing a good job in the coming years to make sure that this can be done safe and sound and with the public acceptance, or at least a good dialogue for this to happen also, so we can inspire other potential developments around Europe. Next. Prices, I just thought it would be nice to bring some numbers from, I took these from some of Jesper's colleagues in the Danish Energy Agency. Very high level example, and of course, depending on amounts of injection per year and the reservoir and so on and so forth, but I think it's not unrealistic to say that onshore could cut the cost in half, also depending on modes of transport and so on, but these numbers speak to themselves. If you save 20 euros per ton of CO2 you store, that's a big gap. There could be more depending on whether you only doing ship offshore compared to short onshore pipeline to onshore storage sites. The gap would be bigger. Probably these numbers are too low for what we see in the near future. But again, there's not a lot of public numbers about the cost of storage, so these are just generalized numbers as a reference. And if you click again, we say, but what about this not under my backyard? So providing an example, this is just us thinking. Say you spend some of these savings that you have from going onshore for creating local value, and you inject 5 million tons per CO2 per year, that would equal amount to 2 million euros per year that you could put in a local fund, do something good to the community. What about my shareholders? Well, maybe your shareholders will only have this storage facility if you get local acceptance. So this could be not a way to compensate because we believe it's safe and sound, but a way to make sure that more people are for and not just don't care or against. So maybe a little price. There could also be other things, but I think this savings could be brought into place in some way or another. And the next slide. So it takes 10 years maybe. I just, Frida mentioned we had this climate election in 19, then we had the Danish Council on Climate Change recommending CCS as part of the toolbox, and we had a subsidy scheme in 2020, and then the experts from GEUS, which is the independent geological advisors, they said, well, we have 14 available locations onshore, nearshore. Then there was a roadmap saying, okay, let's acquire more data for 8 locations. Then they acquired data for 6. There was a tender for 5 locations. 3 locations were awarded, including Ulrik and Kjetil talked about. And how many places will be injected onshore in 2019? This is probably what happens when you dig deeper and you see constrained resources. But if you click again, just if your country, you're looking into something, or you're a policymaker, make sure to consider maturing many sites in parallel, start early and be realistic about when it can deliver. We need a lot of storage sites, and yeah, as just this very high level table shows, it takes time and some locations may not move on to the next phase. And I really hope the future exploration will prove positive, but we still don't know, and we need a lot of storage sites. So more is more in this case. We need more sites developed across Europe. Next. So this is just an extra point to spend all my time. We often hear that CCS is energy inefficient. We can use power, money better, and money is one thing. But if you just look at the how many gram of CO2 we replace by 1 kilowatt hour for CCS, this is a generalized example, but then it's proven that it's really effective use of green power, even more than replacing coal and electric vehicles. The potential is not as vast as replacing coal, but it's a good way to put your power. Also, maybe compared to the other end of the scale where you have e-fuels, we will do a lot of e-fuels in the future and hydrogen and so on, but it's a lot less efficient. So it's not an argument against CCS that it uses a lot of energy. It's quite contrary. So that was my 10 minutes. Please reach out if you have further questions.
Thank you very much, Tobias. And I think we're coming to the end of the hour that we allocated for this webinar. Unfortunately, we'll have to wrap up, although I see a lot of questions still coming up. But I think we covered a wide ground today with a lot of information and insight. And of course, we probably need days to cover everything in detail and depth. So I think we'll be wrapping up. And I would like, first of all, to thank our speakers for accepting our invitation and being here with us today and offering the knowledge, insight, and all the information about these projects. I would also like to congratulate Denmark on this really important development in CCS and being the pioneer on onshore storage exploration and setting an example for Europe, and also about stakeholder engagement and public perception on CCS. Also, congratulations to Norway. We have, as we have this collaboration going, and the Northern Lights providing important insight, lessons learned in Europe and around the world. And we have Norwegian colleagues here with us today. And thank you to the audience, to the viewers, for spending 1 hour of your day with us. I hope you've learned a lot. And we will be posting the recording on our website in a few weeks, and hopefully also some slides from this webinar. So please reach out to us, visit our website, find us on social media if you have any questions or would like to download the recording. And I would also like to thank my colleagues Elena and Ruth, who are working behind the scenes to deliver this webinar to all of you. Well, thank you very much, and goodbye. We'll see you in other occasions.